Point Pleasant Park is culturally and spiritually significant to the Mi'kmaq Nation as they historically managed and respected the land, and they relied on the Acadian forests and wildlife for their very survival. The Acadian forest is unique to the Atlantic region with a composition of hardwood and softwood tree species. In 1866, Point Pleasant Park was established and protected as a natural green space in the city of Halifax, important for community growth and well-being.
I will be talking about the methods. So there was 6 seats within Point Pleasant Park. That data was collected from 2004 until 2023, but not 2005, 2007, 2016, and 2022. The area was 400 meters square. We focused on areas that was most impacted by the hurricane. The diameter of each tree was measured at the present height, the DBH, set at 1.3 meters above the ground by fixable measuring tape in centimeter. We wrapped the tape around the tree and we got the number. We looked at the different factors as well, such as red spruce number, species richness, how many types of trees there were in the area, and Juan winner index. So random plots and replicates were established within each set to ensure representative sampling and ensure enough data was collected for stats analyzing of trees. Using Excel, we put all the data together to create graphs using factors that we either measured or observed over time by year. Here are examples of the figure that were created using Excel. The red label, the species richness, DBH, and Juan diversity. They are all over time by year. We used linear regression analysis to examine the effect of the relationship between dependent and independent variable. This will also tell us about the strength between the two variables.
To determine how the overall forest community changed over time, we calculated Shannon's diversity index at sites measured from 2004 to 2024, as shown in Figure 1. In the early years following the disturbance, there's low diversity as expected with the initial rise of fast-growing pioneer species, which means low richness and evenness and only a few species in high abundance due to increased nutrient availability. As the environment changes over time, more species emerge and biodiversity increases as seen in the graph with the overall incline trend. There is growing richness and evenness in the forest due to more competitive interactions between species that limits areas suitable for different species to grow. As the overall forest community moves towards its climax community, we expect to see the rise of biodiversity to slow down as richness and evenness stabilize and even drop slightly as the slower growing, more dominant species outcompete others less tolerant to shade. Eventually, Shannon's diversity is expected to plateau at high value since a stable Acadian forest has high diversity. The interactions between species, resource availability, and access to light will limit the spread and emergence of new species.
To examine the relationship between time and species succession after Hurricane Juan, we use linear regression to examine the change in abundance of the number of individuals of red maple in Point Pleasant Park over time. Despite certain fluctuations in abundance, there's a weak positive trend between abundance of red maples over time between 2004 and 2024. The results show that time is an indicator of the gradual increasing abundance of the red maple trees, and after a disturbance, population levels of red maple will undergo successional recovery and eventually begin to slow as succession continues. For the next graph, a regression analysis was performed between time and the number of red spruce trees per 400 meters squared post-disturbance to evaluate the relationship between succession behavior and recovery time after the hurricane. While there were some fluctuations, the trend indicated a weak positive relationship between red spruce abundance between the years of 2004 and 2024, indicating that successional recovery will gradually increase abundance of red spruce over time. To describe succession accurately, a third regression analysis was performed between the diameter of trees measured at breast height in centimeters over time to determine the general size of trees pre- and post-disturbance in Point Pleasant Park. There was an overall decrease in DBH post-disturbance, indicating a weak negative relationship between the size of trees between 2004 and 2024. Around 2020, however, the DBH began to increase again. These results indicate that the tree circumference tends to decrease in the early years post-disturbance and then will experience successional recovery over time. The data shows the dominant species in Point Pleasant Park changed from red spruce to red maple between the years of 2004 and 2024. During the time prior to the hurricane, the red spruce was the dominant species, as seen between figures 2.1 and 2.2, but after the storm the abundance shifted. This can be explained since red spruce is a slow-growing late succession species, whereas red maple is an early to mid-succession species, which has a far quicker growth rate. Before the storm, the forest was an old-growth forest, as seen in figure 2.3, which shows that trees had a larger diameter than those seen years after the hurricane. The age of the forest before the storm corroborates our assumption that the late successional species, red spruce, would be dominant. After the storm hit the measured area, there was no red maple at all and only a few red spruce. DBH at this point also took a sharp decrease and eventually began to climb again in 2020, which can be attributed to the rapid growth of primary succession species, followed by the arrival of mid-succession species. The storm allowed the forest to assume a new successional pattern, and the reborn forest saw the maple spruce take the lead as the dominant species. If succession and growth continues as it has been, we can expect to see the relationship of late succession restored as the climax community is reached. Red maple is still highest in abundance but has begun to slow, and eventually the red spruce, due to its late succession and slow growth, will become more abundant. Breast height will then also recover its values as seen in 2004. The results align with reports that mid-successional presence of both trees will fade into a higher abundance of red spruce as was seen in our prediction. Quick succession and predicted recovery patterns aligns with predictions that urban forests can show natural succession recovery after disturbance and do not need to be intervened with. This means that in understanding the succession of the forest, we can react accordingly after storms and other major disturbances. In this case, the forest generally left alone will recover as it was before. These results indicate that Point Pleasant Park is currently at a mid-successional stage.
I will be talking about results section question 3. I choose to talk about species richness. The trend line shows the number of species richness increased by 0.53 species per year. As we shift to the end of the line, we see the points are less scattered around the line, but we still have a strong relationship due to R square 0.6. This could be because of secretion processing, could be big impact for this increase, leads to a greater diversity of a species, which made the forest more complex by having more trees. The prediction is species richness will slow down or reach to plateau as approaches it is the climax community. We think that because of the limiting resources which reduce the opportunities for new species to colonize, potentially reduce species richness and weaken the overall relationship.
Based on the trend seen from figures 1 to 3, it can be concluded that the Point Pleasant Park forest is in a mid-successional stage. This conclusion was interpreted from our understanding of the current growth rates of the forest and the overall biomass since the storm. Figure 1 expresses that species diversity is increasing over time, and the continuous positive trend demonstrates a mid-successional trend where diversity is recovering and increasing and has not yet plateaued at the climax community. Figures 2 express this through the recovery of the dominant species over time. Both the red spruce and red maple trees are increasing in abundance, with the red maple the most abundant, as is expected in a mid-successional forest. The overall DBH of the forest also indicates early succession species have recovered since the decline, and mid-succession growth is increasing. Finally, figure 3 shows that species richness is increasing greatly over time, a factor consistent with the mid-succession processes before species richness plateaus. So, all signs point to mid-succession. It's important to consider the impacts of the urban park design. Burley indicates that the nature of urban parks made its recovery more difficult. Primarily, the trees were planted simultaneously, and efforts to diversify the park through thinning was prevented by public pressure, so the even-aged canopy was predicted to be highly vulnerable to strong windfall. While this hands-off approach was typical, management also consistently removed woody debris and materials to reduce wildfires, an act that diminished the quality of the soil and made it difficult for succession to take place. The aspects of this city park made it particularly more vulnerable to disturbances and slowed the rate of recovery post-storm. As opposed to allowing even-aged and similar species to regrow, the Point Pleasant Park Comprehensive Plan works to plant more early successional trees to increase resistance. Their hands-on approach works to restore a more diverse and functional forest while preserving its quality and cultural value. Maintaining the forest quality while adopting new ways to improve resilience aligns well with the First Nations methods of ecological stewardship. In allowing traditional Indigenous knowledge, which is based on natural and balanced ecological relationships, the mature Acadian forest can be restored and fortified. We would like to express gratitude for the support of Dr. Allison Schmidt as well as our lab TA Tegan Robinson, who provided the knowledge, tools, and advice to interpret this data. We would also like to thank the efforts of students and educators of Biology 2060 in collecting the data from Point Pleasant Park. The collective continuation of this multiple-year project allows us to interpret data on a greater scale and further our understandings of the world around us. Ultimately, we can apply this knowledge in our ongoing efforts to live with and preserve the natural world.